Also, let me just take a moment to introduce our panel for anybody who doesn't know the folks up here. I'm Dave. I'm the lead pastor here. Scott is our guest speaker this weekend. Comes from Indiana and originally from Michigan.
Yep.
So we won't hold that against him. You got some fans out
I was
there.
going to say, I see a few of them out there.
Lori Volkowski is a Bible teacher, and she and her husband just recently felt led by the Lord to step up from this church and to launch a new church up here in the northwest corner, up in Cooney, Ohio. And so she has taught on biblical prophecy about end times as well. And Becky Blaker, who's one of our oversight team members, and she has just finished up a class on Revelation. Am I right? Okay. And she is just thrilled.
Yes.
There's the smile. Okay, fine.
We're just decorative stuff. These are the experts over here.
So I see Marilyn has a question for us.
Yeah.
Okay, the question is in Revelation, was it 17 and
17.
18, about the fall of Babylon and how the Antichrist has no longer need of her, so gets rid of Babylon. And there are thoughts that Babylon is perhaps a world system, or it is actual nation, or just what. And so she is asking what the interpretations are on that. Feel free.
Well, like I said, I can share stuff, but you guys are hearing from me, so for all these different sessions. So if anybody else has anything first that you'd like to share, that'd be great.
Well, am I on? There we go. Yep. So, in Revelation 18, in chapter 9, or verse 9, it says, when the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. And so, I don't know, I've heard several different interpretations of that, but it is probably some sort of world religion that the world has embraced, which is why she's called the whore of Babylon. And so in a way it's kind of a system, but it's that religious system that gets brought down and destroyed. And that's probably the best way I've understood it. You got a microphone.
Hello.
There you go.
It could be part of a world political system too, because if I remember correctly, Babylon is a representative in what we saw, possibly religion, possibly political. It could, but it's earthly. It's not of the heavenly realm. It's not of the spiritual realm. It's of the worldly realm.
Mm-hmm.
you think, Marilyn, back to what was Babylon? What was Babylon? Yeah, and it was, you know, the Israelites they got taken captive by that Babylonian system, which was such a worldly system made up of all kinds of things. So,
Yeah, my thoughts on this, that it is um, kind of like this one world religion that it mixes so many different things. And so it's almost like the moral relativism that you see even in our nation, perhaps even especially in our nation today, where people do as they please without any regard for God, and without any regard for the one true God. It is the idea that all these religions are going to lead to the same place. And so it doesn't really matter what you believe. And so it's kind of like a universalism that it is, it's a prostitutional religion. It prostitutes itself to everyone, to all religions, to come under the umbrella of this one.
I would just add to that. I think that a lot of what's being talked about here, and as it gets into like the silver, the gold, I think the whole system is collapsing. This is where people put all of their faith, all of their hope, all of their, they were believing in this, what was being sold type of a thing, and now it's all fallen apart. And it's kind of like where it says in the scriptures as well, they'll take their gold and their silver and stuff, and they'll cast it out in the street. It becomes an abhorrent to them. It's like, and you hear on TV and stuff all the time, oh, invest in silver, invest in gold. It's always been a great, thing to invest in, and for hundreds of years or thousands of years or whatever, put your faith in this. And I think people have. They've put their faith in all these wrong things, and now it's collapsing. They're seeing it, the whole system, including the silver, the gold, everything that they've trusted in, that they, will put their hope in, that they put everything, it's collapsing. And it's fallen in on themselves and whatever. And now they're just like, okay, it's this is where I think God's kind of, getting to the point where he's saying, I'm going to show you where you've placed your hope. I'm going to show you where you've placed all your hopes, desires, everything else, and then I'm going to collapse it. It's going to get destroyed. It's, and this is where people start to realize as well, everything that I've, put my hope into, everything that I've trusted, everything that I believed, it's now all collapsing. It's now all, worthless. And so then they can see as well when God is, then coming into this place where, the judgments, the final judgments are being set up and whatever. Why? Why is he having to, do all this? It's to make everything, help people to understand, but then make everything right. And to make everything right, you got to collapse and destroy that which isn't.
I know what scholars say.
Thank you.
I know what scholars say. I'm going to read it because people may not know this verse. Now, as we said, Babylon falls right before the Great Tribulation, and that is the last 3.5 years of Christ's reign. And then, I'm going to start from verse 15. I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels who had 7 plagues, which are the last, because in them the wrath of God is finished. And then I'm sorry, my phone flipped, and that is not where I want to go. Hold on. Thank you. Okay. Okay, here it is. Sorry, starting over Revelations 18, verse 1. Babylon has fallen. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison for every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations has drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality." Now this is my question, verse 4. I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities." So he's going to start the last judgments. Now, I know many scholars, and I know many pastors, and I know many of us want to hope we're pre-trib rapture. All right? But when I read this verse, it says, "Come out of her, my people." Now, I've also read that means don't participate in Babylon and the sins of the world, which I agree, but it says, "So you will not be in her plagues." So to me, that says there's believers there that God is saying you are not to participate in the wrath of God in these final judgments. So come out. That sounds like a rapture to me. It could be a physical rapture, which could be mid-trib. I don't know if everybody knows what I'm talking about, but I just wondered what your thoughts are on that. It certainly does mean don't participate in the world system, but it could mean more.
Okay. Go ahead, you guys. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm getting on the first boat. Um, I think about perhaps like some of the evil places that you might think of in our world today. Um, and, if God is going to visit his holy terror on such a place, he would advise his people to get out. Like um, when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, God brought Abraham and Lot out, or Noah out of,
Mhm.
before the flood. And so I think it's a warning for people that who are who are perhaps, I don't know, not necessarily a physical place living in it, but if they are um, working with that system kind of tangentially from the outside, or um, I'll just use the, as an example the gambling industry. Okay, and overall the gambling industry makes people poorer. There are a lot of connections with organized crime, etc. And so, if you are working for a casino, but you're a Christian, here's an example of saying, get out, get out. There's destruction is coming. Or if you're somebody who owns a business that sells something to them, and you're kind of in business with them, get out, so that there's not the repercussions that would also affect you. So that's how I would see that, as not necessarily a rapture there, but a warning to get out of those unholy alliances. Right. The I believe there are people going to be turning to Christ. Yeah, and so those believers are the ones that are, he's saying, get out from this system, get out as much as you can. So I'm going to shut up and let others.
Okay. Yes. I still believe, personally, I still believe in the pre-trib rapture, you know, that we're going to be taken beforehand. I still think that because it says, for instance, right after that, you're going to have 144,000, 12,000 of each of the 12 tribes of Israel, virgin men that are going to be witnesses during this whole time. They're presented in the very beginning part of the tribulation period, and they're still there at the very end. They will be the entire time that they will not be able to be killed. They are going to be in the entire time witnessing, and people are going to continue to come to Christ even through that tribulation period. Plus, the first 3.5 years, you also have the two witnesses that are there. They're also going to be not only sharing, they're going to be doing great miracles. And again, they're not going to be able to be touched until that halfway point when God allows them to be killed. And then, for days they parade them around, and then all of a sudden there's a voice comes from heaven and says, come up hither, which is the same thing that you read in chapter 4, verse 1 of Revelation, where I believe the church is taken. It says, come up hither. The chapters 2 and 3 is where he talks to the church. Chapter 4, verse 1, you hear that word, and you never hear of the church again through the entire rest of that time until they're coming back with him in the 19th chapter of Revelation. So I think there will be believers. The main focus actually goes back to the Jews during this period of time because they have not accepted Christ. Many have not accepted Christ as their Savior. And this is where they will come to that knowledge through this period of time. And so the primary focus throughout this period is to the Jews. Not that it's not going to affect everybody. It's going to affect everybody in the whole world. But in Daniel, it talks about, he was asking how long and this and that. And, there's going to be 490 years, 483 of it they had to pay during that time. There's a 7-year period left where for the Jews, they're going to be having to, for their disobedience and whatever, the primary focus is back on the Jews. So I think there will be people there. They will be the ones that, buy into some of this stuff. And like Dave was saying, like with Lot and stuff, was told to come out right before he was going to destroy this. And so I think that's basically the same thing that's being said here when the people really start to realize this is not what I thought it was. And they start turning back to God and relying on that instead of the gold, the silver, all the other stuff. And they start turning back to God, and they're hearing from God, and God says, get out. I'm going to destroy this. You have one last chance to get out, or you can suffer like everybody else. But they're called to come out. And so that's what I believe is, happening here, that he's telling them to come out before he does his final destruction on Babylon.
Scott, is it possible when it says, come out of her, my people, he's directing that to the Jews, the unbelieving Jews, and he says, come out of her, and if you are saved, those plagues, some of those plagues bypass the saved people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's very possible that when he says, come out of her, my people, come out of her, my Jewish people, Israelites come out of her and be saved. Like, come to me. Is that possible?
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
and the plagues that you're mentioning, as yesterday we talked about or Scott particularly talked about, in the second half of the tribulation, that part that is known as the Great Tribulation, it's going to be a very horrific time with lots of evil, and where the Antichrist is just going, full bore, and there's so the idea of her plagues would be those horrific actions of the Antichrist, trying to get rid of Babylon, any remnant of her, etc., and trying to annihilate any kind of religious entity at all.
And some of the punishment as well during that period of time, as what's being said here, there is a distinction between those who have the mark and those who do not have the mark. And some of the stuff that's happening is only to those who have accepted the mark. So there is a distinction that God makes throughout this period of time. There's marks given both by God and by Satan. And this whole aspect is, the whole thing is about worship. When it says about the false prophet and whatever, and when this, in the 13th chapter, where he's talking about this image, and it's given breath, and it's given the ability to speak, and all these other things, and such, and it says right after that those who won't worship this image, this of the beast and whatever, will be killed. This is, it's all an act of worship, and it's all about the souls and such. And, at the end, in the 19th chapter, when he comes back and he slays them all with, that are not of him with the sword of his mouth, there's still a huge number that's there that made it through because they didn't receive the mark. If you receive that mark, it says there is no hope at that point. That is an act of loyalty and an act of worship as to, what you're doing in that, throughout that process.
Reminded me that she read.
Yeah. You might have to say it again. She was just talking, we're going through the book of Numbers. We go through like a chapter a day and kind of try to break it down, try to get as much as we can out of it. When we get all the way through the Bible, we start over. And but this was the one of the things we were just reading in Numbers 13, I think it was, 16, where it was talking about how God, different times he had told Moses, I'm just going to get rid of them. I'm going to start over. I mean, these people are grumblers, complainers, whatever. No matter how much I do for them, it's never enough. A day or so later, they're just right back at it, grumbling and complaining, And so anyway, he says, get out, get away. I'm going to destroy them and such, and this was his chosen people. This was his own people. And, so he told the ones that were faithful, whatever, to get out before, I bring this destruction on these ones that are not faithful. And whatever. And so this is like, I think what she was basically saying is it's like a consistent theme throughout the scriptures. It's not just there, it's throughout the scriptures. This is his chosen people, and yet he destroys them. He opens up the earth and, swallows a bunch of them and brings fire down and destroys some, and it's just like, and this is his chosen elect. And yet, it's a consistent thing throughout the scriptures as he's both looking out for them, but also comes a point where he says, okay, that's enough, and destroys them. Which mic? Somebody give her a mic, please.
Yeah, thank you, have it, okay. Along the thought of the path for the people of Israel to find salvation, there's a thought that they have their own separate path. And we always emphasize you come to the Lord and you're saved through Jesus. For them, Jesus is the Messiah. There's some Christians who have, so there's a twofold thought and a question, that believe that they must join, and I guess being from New York, you find a lot of Jews and there are a lot of denominations, if you want to call it, within the Jewish community. And we witness to them because there is this misconception sometimes among Christians that they are a separate people and that, you see them in the community, but you don't witness to them because they're Jews. And they're ethnic Jews and they're religious Jews, but either way, they're Jews. And there's no separate path other than what you've explained, that they will have to come to accepting the Messiah and that process for salvation to happen, or they will suffer being lost. And the other point is that as a Christian, you don't have to, and we've seen many, that movement grew, was very popular a while back, the Messianic Jews. And those were Christians who joined because they believed they had to become from the Messianic side in order to find salvation. And if you can further elaborate, am I correct in thinking that there is no separate path but through Jesus to be saved? And as a Christian, when you accept Jesus, you don't have to convert to Messianic movement because you are already a child of God.
Yep, absolutely. And at the end of the book of Revelation, when the Jews as a nation finally realized that that is the Messiah, the Jesus that they crucified, and they call out, I forget, it says it in and they mourn for the one that they crucified when they finally recognize it. But it takes that final 7 years to get them to, as a whole, to finally recognize who the Messiah is. Today we have just that remnant of Messianic Jews, the ones that have recognized Jesus as their Savior, just like any person, Gentile, has to recognize Jesus as their Savior to be saved. It's the same thing for the Jew. They too they need that. But the majority of them don't. They are either religious Jews or ethnic Jews. Israel is full of ethnic Jews right now. They're just Jews because they're Jews. They don't even hold to the religious part of the Jewish faith. And so, and I'm a huge dispensationalist, which just means that God, he has certain times that he focuses on the Jews. So right now we are in the time of the Gentiles. right now. That's what this is right now. The age of grace, the time of the Gentiles. When that final 7 years comes, God's attention shifts. And if you read, Scott mentioned it in Daniel, that 490-year prophecy, and it says why the 7 years has to happen. And it mentions it is to focus on the Jew and to bring them to Christ. So we need to witness. We need to witness to the
Amen.
Jews.
We are grafted in
Exactly.
as Christ, as Christians. We are grafted into the vine, and there is pruning for those who don't believe. But there's also still time for the unbelieving Jews to believe in Christ and to have that life that has been imparted to us run through our veins and let that run through the whole vine, and for them to be quote unquote infected
Mhm.
with this new life in Christ.
Anything else?
Sure.
No. No.
I believe that the 7-year tribulation is going to start when a peace treaty is signed between Israel and who will become the Antichrist.
Well,
And
yesterday we were talking about that this war would precede the tribulation, and that there, yeah. So is it possible? It
I want to say something about it. I was hoping somebody would ask about a little bit more about the Ezekiel 38.
Yeah. I think that's what this is in reference to.
Is that the war you're talking about? Not the start of the tribulation. Could that have been?
Okay.
So, if you go to Ezekiel, and I agree with Scott when he says it's. I think you said that the Ezekiel 38 war is probably going to take place prior to the start of the tribulation.
Mhm.
And I believe that too. But there are some markers that have to be checked off the list for Israel for that war to even take place. But if you go to Ezekiel 38 and you go to verse 11, it says, "You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages." I can't read. "I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates." That is not Israel right now.
Okay.
They're getting bombed. They have walls. They have a military. They have the IDF on constant alert. Those sirens go off constantly for them to take cover. So, in order for the Ezekiel 38 war to happen, it tells us here in Ezekiel 38, this is how Israel has to be living when that attack happens. But I do agree, and I'm wondering if these Abrahamic Accords that are being talked about right now, if something's going to happen to where Israel feels very, very secure and safe, and they let their guard down, kind of like what we saw on October. They had let their guard down there for Hamas to come in. Their guard was down. It's not now. What? Mm-hmm. 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 There's a lot of thought on it, and we never know if prophecy is fulfilled until after it's happened. And so how it plays out, we don't know, but as we watch the players, and I'm a firm believer that it is Russia, Iran, Turkey. I think those are your three top players.
Coming
And
from
right
the
now,
north, yeah,
they've
there's still.
never had relationship like they do right now. Ever in history have they had that kind of relationship that they do right now.
Also, looking at the news, because you mentioned it vaguely yesterday, when, I don't know if anybody heard the speech that was given by Trump when the Saudis applaud him and they got up. In everything that he said, talking about look for the signs, his emphasis to them was peace. The word peace came. And the fact that he brought certain communities together and he was talking about peace rather than war, and they applauded that sometimes you get a sense that God is preparing. I mean, that for me, that was touching, that God is preparing the way for these very adverse populations against unity and harmony and peace, for him to be in that land in Saudi Arabia and to say what he said, for me is part of what God is preparing the way.
And
Correct, that he mentioned that, yes.
yeah, and just a couple quick things. He said peace, but he also said prosperity. These were the two things. And, it also then reminds me of the Laodicean church, who was very prosperous, who the last church that the Lord mentioned, they were very prosperous, so much so that they were at this point, we're in need of nothing. No, we're fine, Lord. And with that, where's the Lord? He's outside knocking, it says. It starts off saying, he's outside knocking and wanting to come in. But they were very, very prosperous. They felt they were, at peace. They were in need of nothing, this and that, and whatever. And yet, as was mentioned, it's through this 7 years of difficulty, the worst this world has ever seen or will ever see. This is what's going to turn the people. It's not the prosperity. It's not the peace. It's through all the tribulation that is going to come, that is going to finally turn them. And as we had talked about, with some of the scriptures previously in the sessions, it says about there's a time where God has prepared this place in the mountains for him. And he tells them to flee to the mountains because he has this place, and probably not everybody, the Jews. And not everybody is probably going to go. That's why there's still some, that are out there that didn't listen, like so many other places and people and whatever at times throughout the scriptures. They didn't listen. And so as they're told, he has this place for them and they're secure. And anybody that's in there, they don't get touched throughout that time. But if you're not in that place of security where he is prepared for you, you are vulnerable. And so these ones that are left and didn't listen, they're the ones that are still vulnerable. And I believe with David, I think it's in the 16th chapter of John, where it says about we're grafted in. There's neither Jew nor Greek, bond or free, male, female. We're all the same under the cross. I mean, there's still differences. Don't get me wrong. There's still a Jew. There's still a Gentile. There's still male. There's still female. There's still, but it's that we're one under the blood. It's not just for the Jews. It's not just for the Gentiles. It's not just for the men. It's not just for the women. We're all the time under grace, right now that was mentioned. And so, these are the things that, I think about with, some of this stuff and such. And you said something else about the war for Ezekiel 38. The safety. That's why I say, it said peace and safety. In Jeremiah 6, he says, they're going to say peace and safety and whatever. And that's what I think you're right, that they're bringing about this sense of peace, or trying to, this sense of peace throughout, and they're going to have a false sense of peace. They're going to, once again, kind of let their guard down. Oh, look at all this, people, they're in agreement there, and all of a sudden, boom, and it says there's nobody there. Nobody comes to them. God intervenes for his name's sake. It doesn't mention anybody else there, but God will be there. What's that? No, it's not a 7-year war. It's a 7-year of burning of the metals. The war is going to be, everybody's going to be coming against them, and God's going to intervene, and that war's over. The 7, yeah. Not even. I mean, it could be one day. But there's going to be huge earthquake and all kinds of stuff. He's going to bring, it says, hail, fire, brimstone, everything, and it's going to destroy all the armies that were coming against him. That's going to take place very, very quickly. It could be a day, but it's 7 years of then cleaning up, basically, the...
Okay. All right. I think that's all the time we have. We had some great questions, and we look forward to hearing from Scott in the sermon during our worship time. So we got about 10 minutes before the worship service starts. So if you haven't gotten your cup of coffee, go ahead and get that now. And